Okay, so we have some updates from the Department of Transportation on how they are going to test for and then implement this English language speaking proficiency requirement that Donald Trump basically just signed an executive order on very recently. And just to be clear, this is not a new law. Donald Trump signed an executive order requiring the enforcement of an old law because, as I will show you here, this law has not been enforced basically at all over the past decade or so. So this is going to be a very important video for all CDL drivers because it covers driver safety, but especially if English is not your first language, if English is your second language. So, and I would also very much like to know people's opinion on this because I know this has people divided. Some people think that the enforcement of the English language speaking proficiency requirement will greatly enhance safety, and some people are saying that it's discriminatory. Let me know in the comment section below what you think. So first, let's start with some of the statistics, and I will show you a video here of Sean Duffy, the Department of Transportation Secretary, where he goes over the statistics on the enforcement of this law.
So in 2015, before President Obama changed the guidance, over 99,000 drivers had English language proficiency violations. So almost 100,000 violations of not speaking English. 1,000 of those drivers were taken out of service. So let's fast forward to 2024. That dropped to 10,000 violations, and 0 were taken out of service for a violation of the English language proficiency.
All right, so he explains in very black and white, plain language that most of these violations that were cited back in 2015, they did not put the driver out of service. So they cited a violation, but a violation without any action doesn't really mean anything. So the driver could continue on except for that 1%. And that went all the way down to 0% in 2024. Not only did the out of service go down to 0%, they put no one out of service, but they also, as you can see, from 100,000 basically to 10,000, the violations went down by 90% as well. So basically, they're not enforcing this law. So now we have some updates, and I am going to go through them with you. I highlighted all the important parts. This is from ccjdigital.com. If anybody wants to read the article in full, I think I highlighted what was important. Let's go through it. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration on Tuesday issued guidance on how the agency plans to enforce the requirement that commercial drivers speak English. So this is how they're going to do it. It is a two-step process. So it's basically like a little examination that has 2 steps. So let's go through those 2 steps. So the guidance advises the FMCSA personnel to initiate all roadside inspections in English. So if you just have a regular roadside inspection, they are going to be done in English. And if you can speak English very easily, then the exam process, this 2-step process, won't even come into play. It's if the inspector's initial contact with the driver indicates that the driver might not understand instructions, then the inspector is to conduct the ELP English Language Proficiency Assessment in order to evaluate the driver's compliance with the English Language Proficiency Rule. So if he's having a hard time communicating with you, he thinks you might not understand what he's saying, then he will start this 2-step kind of exam process. So the first step is a driver interview. The driver interview, the FMCSA said, will establish the driver's ability to respond to official inquiries by speaking English sufficiently. Adding, inspectors should inform the driver that the driver should respond to the inspector in English. Even if the inspector can speak multiple languages, it must be done in English. And communication aids, this is important, such as interpreters, people that might be with you, iSpeak cards, cue cards, smartphone applications like Google Translate, telephone interpretation services are not to be used during the interview. And those tools may mask the inability to communicate in English. So you've got to be able to communicate with somebody without an interpreter, without any aids. So if the inspector determines that the driver is unable to respond to official inquiries in English sufficiently, and they don't really expand on what sufficiently means, this is kind of a judgment call by the inspector. It is the policy of the FMCSA that the inspector cite the driver for a violation And if the driver fails the interview portion, the inspector is not required to conduct the sign recognition portion assessment. So that's the second portion of the exam. So if you fail the first part of the exam, there's no reason to move on to the second part of the exam. But if you pass the first part of the exam, if they can communicate with you whatever they are saying is sufficiently enough, then the second part of the exam is the sign recognition portion. The FMCSA calls for inspectors to evaluate the driver's ability to understand sufficiently U.S. highway traffic signs by conducting a highway traffic sign assessment to include highway traffic signs that conform to the Federal Highway Administration's Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices for Streets and Highways, and also, so signs basically, normal signs that you would see on the road, and dynamic electronic display message signs that the driver may encounter while operating a commercial motor vehicle. Everybody is familiar with these big like bulletin boards that they can change that go over highways mostly, that sometimes they'll have amber alerts on them, or there's an accident a mile ahead. So they have to be able to obviously read those because those will be in English. Makes sense to me. All right, so the inspector is to assess that the driver understands the meaning of U.S. highway signs, obviously here. And then the next steps. So they will conduct potentially those two, I don't know, examination processes. And here's the policy. It's the policy of the FMCSA that the inspector also take the following action, including placing the driver immediately out of service. So if you fail one, or like you can't fail both, but if you fail one of these two requirements, the sign recognition or the driver interview, you are violated, but you're also immediately placed out of service. So what this is going to do is, number one, is it's greatly going to increase the number of violations. So from 10,000 or 100,000 or whatever it was quoted from Sean Duffy, depending on the year, those violations are going to greatly go up. But also, based on what I'm reading here, the actions from those violations, meaning getting placed out of service, are going to go up as well, potentially to 100%. If you get violated, you're immediately out of service, and they go on here. Should the driver be placed out of service, the inspector should advise the driver that it's unlawful to operate a commercial motor vehicle while out of service, and the driver should not operate the commercial motor vehicle in interstate commerce until the condition is remedied. I guess meaning until they learn English, as long as that may take. If the inspector determines that the driver is in compliance with the regulations requirements to have the ability to respond to official inquiries and understand highway traffic signs and signals, the inspector may elect to conduct the remainder of the inspection using communication methods and techniques best suited to facilitate the safe and effective completion of the inspection. So this one's real important. What this means is they're not going to violate everybody that just has a hard time with the English language. You just have to be able to understand the direction safely from the inspector. So if English is not your first language and you have just a hard time, and things have to be maybe said a little more slowly. I don't know what the full parameters are, but what they're saying here in this paragraph is very important. It's saying they're not going to violate everyone, and if they feel like you can speak English proficiently enough, maybe they speak Spanish and then they allow you to do the rest of the communication in Spanish, or then maybe they do let you use a Google Translate or something like that. So they're not looking for just anyone that has any difficulty with the English language. Important stuff here. When performing the inspections of the drivers operating commercial motor vehicles in the border commercial zones along the U.S.-Mexico border, the FMCSA advises the enforcement personnel should cite the drivers for violations in accordance with the policy, but should not take the action of placing the driver out of service or initiating an action to disqualify the driver. So this is an exemption here in this U.S.-Mexico border, that a violation will occur, but you will not be placed out of service, kind of like what Sean Duffy was saying, that only a certain percentage were placed out of service based on their violations. That's one exemption. Exemption number two is drivers who are hearing impaired and have obtained a hearing exemption will not be deemed unqualified and placed out of service if they are unable to communicate orally in English. I think that one makes sense. The FMCSA assured of that. So that is the update. Again, a two-step process here to determine if a driver can speak English well enough, again, to read United States signs in English and be able to communicate with people. I mean, communication's pretty important as well, communicating not only with inspector, but possibly law enforcement or people that you're delivering to, things like that. So that's the two-step process. I hope this was very, very helpful. Again, stay subscribed here. When new standards come out, I always make update videos. Until next time, everybody, stay safe.